Welcome to the Chief Healthcare Officer podcast. I'm Dr. Fatih Mehmet Gül. I want to start today's episode with an uncomfortable fact. After 4 decades of patient safety work, landmark reports, never event protocols, root cause analysis, RCAs, high reliability frameworks, billions of dollars invested in quality programs, preventable harm in hospitals is at an all-time high, not improving, not plateauing, rising. And the most honest question senior leaders in our field need to ask themselves is this: if we know what to do, why isn't it working? In connected care, I argue that the answer is rarely the protocol. The smartest checklist in the world fails at the moment a clinician decides it is safer to stay silent. The question is not what is on the policy page. The question is what happens in the corridor afterwards. My guest today has spent his entire career on both sides of the decision. He has worked as an emergency physician in one of the busiest trauma centers in the US. He teaches the next generation of physician leaders at University of Southern California. And he now sits at the intersection of the clinical practice and safety infrastructure as the first ever Chief Clinical Officer as Sentact. Dr. Nicholas Testa, welcome to the Chief Healthcare Officer podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's our pleasure having you with us. Before we get into the substance, I would love for our listeners to hear your story in your own words. You started in the emergency department at LAC plus USC, one of the busiest trauma centers that we know. From there, you moved into the system leadership as Dignity Health, then regional CMO for California at Common Spirit, and then now Chief Clinical Officer at Sentact. Walk us through that arc, please. What pulled you out of ED and into the leadership? And what pulled you more recently out of system leadership and into a company building the infrastructure for safety at scale?
So the first thing that I was pulled towards was emergency medicine. I love emergency medicine and I love clinical medicine and I love community. And I think what I love about community is the culture that a community builds. And it started for me getting the opportunity to train in Los Angeles at LA County USC, now LA General. And I did not have aspirations of staying in academics. I wanted to be a community emergency physician. But what I realized was that I was really enjoying the community of that emergency department at the county hospital. Anyone who's ever worked in a residency knows that they just generate a level of joy, engagement, and challenge that is fun. So I chose to stay. I had the unique opportunity to stay as academic faculty. And like any new academic faculty member, I was tasked with doing something that at the time, about 20 plus years ago, nobody else wanted to do. So they said, Nick, you're the new faculty. We're going to have you do quality improvement. And I said, okay. And I went up to my little cubicle and I Googled, like, what are core measures? Like I didn't know anything about quality improvement. Somebody just told me this was going to be what I was going to do. And so I started to read about it and I said, okay, if I'm going to do this, let's actually make it meaningful. And so I started to marry together the academic aspect of being in a graduate medical education program with the data that I was seeing around quality improvement and realizing that we could actually contextualize this data in such a way to not only make it educational, but also make it meaningful. So for example, if we're going to talk about sepsis mortality rates, let's have a lecture on how you manage sepsis in the emergency department, but then let's also share with you, what do our sepsis bundles look like? What do our outcomes look like? So you marry together the outcomes with the context. I really enjoyed that. It got me recognized by the hospital, and I had the opportunity to take a risk in my career, which was to become the associate medical director at the county hospital over their whole quality program, not just the emergency department, but the entire county program. And I had a wonderful mentor. I can't, praise mentors enough. So I was mentored by the chief medical officer at a very early point in my career. And I spent 7 years getting to lead the majority of their safety and quality initiatives, as well as their joint commission surveys and their CMS validation surveys. And after 7 years of that, I took another risk and did sort of the most challenging thing that everyone does in their career, which is I left the place that I knew the best. And I went and became the chief medical officer at St. Joe's in Burbank, realizing that my career could go beyond the bedside to really taking on this role of physician leadership and influencing how hospitals made decisions in conjunction with a physician, right? So I sat on the C-suite, I gave feedback to the CEO, I really helped drive their safety work. From there, I was recruited to Dignity Health, where I became their Southern California regional chief or divisional chief medical officer. And that was my first exposure to like, how do you provide and lead chief medical officers over 6 hospitals? And it allowed me really at that time to start defining the role of the chief medical officer. What does a CMO do? If you don't carry a stethoscope every single day, like what is that physician doing? So I spent a lot of time really sort of defining that role. And then over the span of 9 years, Dignity formed into Common Spirit Health, and I had the opportunity to become the chief medical officer over the entire state. So I had 29 hospitals under my purview and got to, again, repeat that activity. Finally, about 3 months ago, I decided to take another risk in my career. I really do think it's important that we challenge ourselves. And I left a very, very large healthcare organization to join a group that was a little bit more nimble as at Sentact and become their first chief clinical officer. At Sentact, our sole focus is to work on how do you improve safety, quality, experience, and compliance for hospitals. And that's been my passion for the last 20 years. And now I get to work at a place that is very different, right? Because I'm not affiliated with one hospital, but I get to partner with over 800 hospitals across the country. So it's very exciting.
I'm very much familiar with the Vizient. From my colleagues in the US, whenever we discuss the benchmarks and then thresholds and the others, we always try to look at the Vizient data. Then just after, exploring more about Sentact, I came to know that Vizient was acquired by Sentact. Can you just also shed some light on it?
Sure. We didn't acquire all of Vizient. We acquired a subset of one of their workforces. Vizient has what's called a PSO, a patient safety organization, which allows hospitals to report their data into them and keep it shielded under a patient safety work product. So we acquired their patient safety organization as part of Sentact. So we didn't acquire all of Vizient, we just acquired a very small part of them. But it's been great because it's built a partnership with Vizient in many regards, where we work closely with them on a myriad of things. And it's, I really think while there's lots of competition out there, every time that organizations can figure out ways to be synergistic is beneficial to the ultimate outcome, which is to make healthcare better.
Very much so. And I totally agree. The hospital that I was running, and right now I'm oversighting, we are the affiliation partner with the Cedars-Sinai. And then they also help us here in my hospital for the quality management and the others. And it's a constant discussion is actually around the benchmark and then thresholds and then the other things. So finally, we have decided to tap into the Vizient, and then we're trying to push Vizient also to go out of the US borders. So then they could have more global, support to the hospitals. That's why I believe this is a very important initiative. And Dr. Nick, in between all these things, you kept teaching at USC, through all of it. The undergraduates, medical students, residents. I also, teach in UCL in London. I always feel it is something that we have to give back, and it's a meaningful choice. So, and each time, whenever I go to teaching, I learn more from the people that I meet. So how do you see this teaching experience in between all your different moves?
First and foremost, it brings me joy. And that is the core of why I can continue to do it. The reason I do it is because I think it's important. I think it's important for any physician who gets further down their career to figure out how are you training and educating the new physicians that are coming into the field, particularly around the areas that have become my lanes around safety, quality, experience, and improvement, because it's really not taught as the foundationally in medical schools and residencies as when we were training. But the other thing I find is that I learn a tremendous amount. there's nothing more challenging than if I'm working in an emergency department and I have, a good fourth-year resident who's quoting the literature to me, and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know that. That new, like, I got to go home and read up on, how to manage this case. So I just find it challenging. I will also say that I enjoy. One of the residents once gave me feedback that, Dr. Testa actually cares about me. And it's because I really enjoy learning about what their life is like in between their shifts and how, emergency medicine is notorious for having one of the highest burnouts in any specialty.
Very true.
And I think it's really important for our trainees to start thinking about their life, not only during their shift, but between their shift, because that tends to be what buttresses you through. How do you make sure you take care of your family? How do you take care of your mental health? How do you take care of your finances? How do you take care of all the other things that we need really to be in balance to make us successful clinicians? So I've taken a lot of sort of a personal interest, taken a lot of pride in making sure that the wellness of medical students and residents is attended to.
Brilliant. And I also admire your move to the company who is looking after the safety norms and then the management. This way you will be teaching all of us, I believe, and we will see a lot of contribution from there. So I want to just cheer up to the other tough questions. In my book, Connected Care, I make the argument that trust is the operating system of healthcare. Every other system, your EHR, your protocols, your dashboards, your accreditation program runs on top of the trust. And when the trust degrades, none of those systems perform the way they were designed to. So I want to spend this segment on what that looks like in practice. So as a question, you have walked into a lot of hospitals in your career. When you arrived at the facility and met its leadership team, what was the first signal within the first few minutes that told you whether harm was being surfaced or whether it was being buried?
So the first thing that will be an indicator for me is if I come in and people tell me everything's working great, everything's going well, we have no harm events. So if you tell me you have no harm events, then I know you have a problem. Because almost every hospital that I have been at that is a high-performing, high-functioning hospital that prioritizes safety. You can be high-functioning and not prioritize safety. That is true too. But any hospital that has truly prioritized safety comes in, and the first thing they tell me is like, we had this near miss, we had this harm event, we had this problem, and their numbers are high. And that I know sounds counterintuitive, but a good, healthy culture where people are comfortable reporting means that they are reporting. A place where you are not focusing on reporting or where people are afraid to report harm and they tell you it's zero, I immediately question their data and I push back.
Totally agree, and I live this every day. So if we go back to the trust is the operating system argument on which every protocol runs, what does that look like operationally, not in theory, but in actual daily practice in a hospital?
So trust, I feel like, is something that is earned over time and can't be assumed. So when I have shown up as a new chief medical officer at a hospital, I unfortunately have followed other leadership that was not trusted. And very frequently you'll walk into that setting and the medical staff, the nursing staff will still have the residue of the previous leadership that was there. They connect, the chief medical officer is not to be trusted. They're not going to follow up on the things that I asked. It's going to be punitive, whatever it may be. Okay. And what I've found is that, it's got to be built over time. And I think too often, and I'm going to be a little bit chief medical officer heavy here, chief medical officers walk in and they feel this responsibility to fix all these problems and take on all of these issues that are immediately piling up on their desk, right? Because the only thing that really gets to you as the chief medical officer or the chief of staff are the problems that can't be fixed. And so I think it really requires a tincture of time to build that trust. And what I recommend for all leaders, regardless chief medical officer or other, is start small. Find the small projects that you can dig into and that you can work on, right? You're not going to be able to be everything to everybody. And then allow for patience, because tenacity is critical. So you're not going to fix the complicated CLABSI infection rate that's been going on for years overnight. You're going to start, and it's going to take you months, may even take you years. But that tenacious approach is really valuable in accepting that you're going to get those outcomes. And I think what makes us different as clinical leaders, and where this sort of trust not only works with the staff that's reporting to us and that we're working with, but where we also have to work with the board, is we also have to be the ones that take on the clinical responsibility for the measures that your board may not be comfortable with, right? It's going to be very difficult for a board member to look at sepsis mortality and say, your sepsis mortality is high. You're telling me patients are dying in our hospital. Like, Dr. Testa, you need to fix it. Well, the truth is, this is going to take us weeks to months to years, and you're going to have to look at that number being high a little bit longer than you like. We as clinicians take those decisions on a regular basis, right? You make decisions about what you're going to do to treat a patient, how fast it can occur, what's going to happen. And we take that clinical weight on. I think we underestimate as leaders that we need to take that on. And that's actually how we build the trust of the board. Where we lose the trust is we fold to say, oh, you told me to fix this tomorrow, and I'm going to go fix a CLABSI rate that's been high for 20 years tomorrow. It's just not going to happen. You got to be honest with them. And that's where we build the trust, I believe, in both directions.
CLABSIs, SSIs. I mean, we don't want to simply give a rosy picture. We need to be very transparent in all the aspects. So if the leader starts acting like that and then speaks up, all the rest of the organization will follow this leader. But here I want to ask you a question. Where do most leaders, even the well-intentioned ones, unintentionally erode trust without realizing it, do you think?
I think through small actions that they don't identify. So I don't think leadership is that different than parenting. And if we are consistent in our behavior and we are emotionally stabilized, there's a term, equanimity, that I like, the ability to sort of maintain emotional stability through conflict. As a parent, we know that our children want to see us respond consistently. It's the same thing is true in a hospital. And sometimes the hospital, the stakes can even go up higher and higher. The Joint Commission has now showed up, and you know you have a difficult patient in the emergency department who has been in restraint for an unacceptable amount of time. And you know you have this issue here. And then all of a sudden you get that phone call because you have a board member coming to visit the hospital today, and everything is falling apart. And our ability as leaders to maintain a certain level of calm really, really helps our staffs trust us, right? Our job as leaders is to absorb that. When we start to lash out at our staff, when we start to become reactionary, I really feel people retreat away from us and we lose the trust. And that's the hardest thing to do, because I don't want to imagine that it's easy to take on that level of stress. In the clinical setting, no matter what our specialty is, we've learned that we have to manage the emotions and the stress of our patients the same way as we have to manage the emotions and the stresses of a hospital, so it doesn't end up falling on the shoulders of our teams, who will eventually hide from us and lose trust in us.
Very true, very true. And this is something, I mean, you have been in the operations for years, and I'm running a hospital. Every person looks at our face. If we are nervous, believe me, even from the main gate, the security will see you, and then they will start calling the people, hey, he is ballistic today, be careful about it. And
Totally.
no, I mean, we should definitely manage our own emotion. Then people will start acting in the same way. And I totally agree with you. Under the pressure, all our stuff, they watch us. If we act something consciously, then they just follow the same pattern. But if we lose our temper, then they will lose their temper, even with a higher level, to the other people around them. And we will be ruining the entire operation. Dr. Nick, when we look at the hospital setup, we always try to encourage our people to actually submit more incident reports. And then when I look at the trust part, all these incident report management, I always believe it's an art. We don't want to create a punitive approach, but at the same time, we want to investigate to understand if it is a negligence or a system problem or the other way around. Some of the leaders, we expect them to manage. And when I say the leader, it's not just the CEO. I mean, charge nurse, the nurse directors, or the head of the residency program and the others. We also want them to manage this in a very careful way in order to maintain the trust and then let the people continue reporting. So some of the leaders may not have the enough, let's say, patience, and then this could also create some trust issues. Do you also see this on the ground in the operations?
Yeah, I do. Less and less. But that's also because we've really focused on it for so many years. I think, listen, it's very clear. If staff feels like they're going to be punished if they report something, they're not going to report. I've seen it happen. I've seen a physician disclose to me that, like, oh, I saw the nurse give the wrong medication, but I just told her not to write it up because I know she was afraid she'd get in trouble. And I'm like, what are we doing? Like, that's a cultural problem. But I actually believe we're getting farther and farther away from that. I actually think there are other drivers out there that are actually not helping us. I'll give you one, and this is a pet peeve of mine. Hospitals that overly rely on like how many days it's been since their last serious safety event. So I'll tell you a little anecdote. I was working with a smaller critical access hospital, and they were so proud of the fact that it had been 200 and some odd days since their last serious safety event. And then they had an event where they had given an excessive amount of a medication to a patient, and the patient survived, but they needed to be moved to the ICU and they needed to be resuscitated. And when we sat down to review the case with them, they said, well, we're not going to call it a serious safety event. And I was like, well, why not? And they're like, well, we're not going to. And I kept prodding them. And then finally I got to it, which was, Dr. Testa, it's been like 250 days since our last harm event. If we call this a serious safety event, we got to go back to zero. And I was like, yeah, that's a problem. That we don't want to focus so much on that number that we're celebrating that we actually then don't call out harm. And this comes back to the initial thing we talked about, which is I know a hospital is serious about their work around safety if they have harm events and if they're reporting them out and if they're analyzing them. I'm less concerned about the number of harm events, to be honest with you, and more interested in how you are responding to them and the system and structure you have put into place to really improve those events. So that's a bit of a long answer, but I think that concept of like chasing zero can actually be detrimental.
That's 100% agreed. I can't agree more. The business what we run is a people business, and it's all about managing such understandings. Now, I want to move into a phrase that has become both important and, frankly, somewhat overused, the psychological safety. In again, connected care, I argue the well-being of caregivers and the safety of the patients are inseparable. A workforce does not feel safe and will not, over time, keep patients safe. But the phrase has been used so loosely in the last few years, some leaders have started to roll their eyes when it comes up. Let's make it concrete with some questions I want to ask you here. The psychological safety is becoming very fashionable. So, how do you make it operational, something a CMO can actually measure and manage?
So let's talk about first what psychological safety is. So it is a shared trust that we create as a leadership team as well as a staff that reports, where we feel comfortable being honest and completely who we are. It does not mean we are nice all the time. And that's where I think it gets a little bit confused. There is a perception that psychological safety equals, oh, we're nice. Doesn't mean you're nice all the time, right? Because within psychological safety, it has to be mapped against accountability. And you need to both be comfortable being truly who you are, speaking up, sharing your voice about a concern, and not being afraid of saying, well, I reported this, so now Dr. X is going to be upset with me, frustrated with me, annoyed with me. I'm going to be punished the next time. So I just want to throw that out there because I think there's some misconceptions that just because we're psychologically safe means like we're nice all the time. No, we're going to have some hard conversations and there's going to be some real work to be done, and it's going to get uncomfortable too, but not in such a way that we alienate people and make them feel excluded or that their voice isn't heard. How you actually do it. I can only go by example, because even if you look at the sort of the anchor work by Dr. Amy Edmondson, she describes it as sometimes it's more magic than it is science as far as how we create a culture of psychological safety. I had a boss of mine who is one of the healthcare leaders that I think the most of, and she had an approach that I really admired. She said, we can handle anything as long as I know about it. I don't want any surprises. And she used that word, she used that phrase, I don't want any surprises, all the time. And then she lived it. So we had, in one of the regions I was working with, we had a number of bad maternal events. And anyone who works in healthcare knows that when you have a bad maternal event, it's devastating, right? It's devastating. And we had a number of them. And I was the person who had to pick up the phone and call her and tell her, hey, we had another event. And I know that we've been working on this at that hospital for multiple years in a row. And we thought everything was fixed. We thought it was better. And now I'm going to tell you, we've had 2 of those events. And every single time, she didn't lash out at me. She didn't show anything but care and concern about, okay, what are we going to do next, Nick? What is our next step? And because of that, I was never afraid to call her. When I heard about the event, I knew that the first thing I needed to do was call her and let her know about it, because then she would help me rally the support to address it. What's important, though, and why we were able to build that trust, was because then she knew that I would own it fully and would be fully accountable. And she didn't need to then say, well, like, have you fixed, you didn't do this, like, what are you going to do about it? Like, it was always like, I always was ready with a plan and some actions to follow up. And that's where the balance becomes important. And I use the example of psychological safety with and without accountability, because I've seen this happen too, where I've seen hospitals that developed strong psychological safety in their operating rooms. And then they had a surgeon who had a retained foreign body afterwards. And the surgeon and the response from the team was, oh, we had a retained foreign body. We're going to report it right away. And then they do their analysis and they go, well, the sponge count was right, so no big deal. It's not our fault. And that lacks accountability. So that's psychological safety without accountability, because we all know that the most frequent event to occur when you have a retained sponge is that the sponge count is actually correct, right? And there was an error with the sponge count. But if the team is willing to just say, we did everything right, not our fault, was unavoidable, that's not accountability, right? You've got to own it.
That's right.
It's only when you really have that culture of psychological safety where I'm willing to say, hey, we had this bad maternal event, and we're going to get in there and we're going to relook at our policies. We're going to study what happened. We're going to really understand it and own it. Then you get that combination of both psychological safety and accountability that gets you the results that you're looking for.
I totally agree. And I always, feel the same way. And I like the way how you have just phrased it. We don't want to have a surprise. We can manage everything we know. And that is something, for years, more than 20 years, when I was running hospitals, I always have seen that if even the team does not inform you, one way or another, it will be heard. The earlier, the better. If we hear it at the early stage, I can manage it. I can find a way even before it becomes a legal issue. So then we can meet with the family, we can explain them, we can put an action plan in order to avoid any other one coming on the way. But we just want them to share everything. And this way, I think it's a blessing to have such leaders as what you have told us. She was a great model as far as I see. And I hope we can all continue like this as the leaders. And I think here there's a good lesson for all the people, whoever listens to us today.
And I think the other lesson is it's easy to talk about these things. It's difficult to do them, right? And this is where being clinical leaders, I think, is so important. If you tell a non-clinical leader that you had a pregnancy that was laboring overnight, there were category 2 tracings, nobody had an opportunity to look at the tracings, but the tachometry kept falling off, and the baby had a nuchal cord, and we delivered a dead baby. If you tell a non-clinical leader that, it's a rough one to manage. And that's also where I see that being a clinician becomes so valuable in leadership, because that can land with a clinician as, that's a terrible event, but I understand everything that you said leading up to it. And I understand this is probably more complicated. So being able to, this comes back to this concept of equanimity and being able to manage our own emotions as we confront these very traumatic events and not lash out initially is so powerful. So I threw a lot of stuff at you there, but that concept of equanimity becomes so important in being able to sort of manage our emotions and not being reactive to the staff when they come to us with stuff, and being able to offload some of that emotion.
Cannot be better explained. I just want to ask you also, in your teaching in USC, what is the lesson on this topic that residents are latest prepared before when they enter to the practice, you think? Because we are preparing all this talent, and when they get into the practice, at which point do you see the gap?
Can you help? Let me explore that question a little bit more. Are you asking when do the
No,
residents?
what I'm asking to you, when you review your residents in your teaching, and then before they enter to the practice, at which point you see a gap in the understanding of this kind of management?
So actually, it's interesting that you asked that question. I just recently taught the med students at USC, and that was the group that I was found to be the most disconnected from this concept of psychological safety, and they were the most intrigued by it. So we spent 2 weeks teaching them safety and quality and process improvement for third-year medical students who are about to step into fourth year. And I would say one of the topics that they were most inquisitive about was around psychological safety. And I think that they felt it most acutely because they were the least empowered team that was on the floors. So when they were working with faculty, residents, they felt like they had no power. And so I think it was really, it was very much a reality for them to feel like that they weren't trusted, that they didn't feel comfortable speaking up. I will tell you, and this also may be a bit of a function of the specialty of emergency medicine, many of the residents that I've worked with over the last 20 years have become more and more confident in their ability. When I say challenge, I don't mean that in a negative way, but to challenge an attending, to say, hey, I don't think that's what we should do. I think we should do this. I've had some pretty real conversations with residents about that. And I think that's very positive and reflective of the culture that's developing. When I think about when I trained, I would have never had the confidence to do some of the things and say the things residents would say now. And I'm not implying that's in a disrespectful way. I just think residents are feeling more empowered to speak up about safety and things that are their concern, and faculty are more willing to listen. So I think the actual opportunity and the disconnect actually happens more in medical school.
So I think this is a very important point, because in the medical school curriculum, I don't think we have such things ready yet. And it's
No.
time to review the curriculum and add such things, I guess. So this connects directly to what you just said about the residents. Let's talk about the tension that I think defines modern healthcare leadership today. The tension between accountability and vulnerability. The traditional management theory, that treats them as opposites. But I always try to argue that they have to coexist in the same leader, often in the same conversation either. Can you walk us through a moment when, as a senior leader, you had to be visibly vulnerable in front of your team, and what it changed? I mean, from my side, sometimes I go in front of the team, and then in the town hall meeting, I say that, look, I made a mistake. And then I have shared this with my CMO, with my decision, and my CMO corrected me, and I
Yeah.
immediately changed this decision and sent another circular to the hospital. With this way, I just showed them, look, I can also make a mistake. But then
Yeah.
I want them to feel that such thing is important, but we need to check with the others. So then we should continue
I,
in the right way. Just
I
to help.
mean, I have 2 examples that I'll give you. One is rather subtle and one is rather extreme. And it has to do with vulnerability, not as deliberately as you just described, right? I definitely have had moments where I've shared, like, hey, I made a mistake. We're going to backtrack. I mean, I'm an emergency physician. I spent my whole life making mistakes and having to change course and adjust. I think that's hardwired in who I am. The two, when I think about vulnerability, they're not maybe the examples that you would naturally be drawn to. But first is a tool that I use that I would just share. I very frequently start by telling stories about myself. So we'll start a lecture or a presentation, and I'll just tell a story about myself, my kids, my life, who I am. I think that there's something human about showing that, like, I deal with the exact same thing that you deal with. We are two different people. We are in different roles, yet we both have kids. And the minute you talk to somebody about being a parent, it just disarms them in a way and makes them vulnerable, that you humanize them and you connect in a different way. So, like, yeah, I could be the CMO of the hospital and you could be the new physician coming in, and we have a power gradient that's between us. But the minute that we both start talking about our families, it just takes us into a different space, and we have a connection that's very real. So that is a tool I use very frequently, and I think is really powerful. Now, this other one is more particular to me. I just happen to be an emotional guy, and there's certain things, usually things that I'm proud of, that when I speak about, I get a little emotional, and I can get choked up to the point where, like, have to hold back tears. It's not usually about like a safety event. I'm rather clinical about that. It's more about when I have a team member that has gone over and above and has done something special, or a team member that is going to be leaving our team, or if I'm just singing somebody's celebrations. I have taken a new approach really since COVID, which was a really emotional time for all of us, which is, if I get to the point where I'm actually emotional, I take a pause, and I may even have a tear, or I actually have even cried on a Zoom in front of a whole group of people as I was saying farewell. And in a previous life, I would have thought that was maybe embarrassing, but I decided to take just a different approach, to say, that's who I am, and this is how I feel, and you're going to see all of me now. And it shocked some people to be like, wait a minute, why is our chief medical officer crying? What's going on here? But that was with emotions I was feeling in the moment, and that was what I wanted to express. So I decided it was more empowering to actually be the whole complete me, and that's as vulnerable as you get, in my opinion.
Great point. I mean, from two samples, what I can see that you're just showing your human side to your team. And then you're just telling them, look, I'm one of you. We're not, I mean, we're the leaders, but we're not the Iron Men, right? I mean, we are also vulnerable, and then we are one of you. And this way, I also encourage my teams, telling them, look, sometimes when you hear something from me, come and challenge me. I mean, maybe you don't agree. This disagreement will help me to make a better decision. And then I want you to come and consider me as another human being like you. But then there is one issue here, Dr. Nick. Many leaders, they learn the accountability long before they learn the vulnerability. Because from the medical school, Joint Commission, so many regulations from one state to another or another country, they always tell us, don't do this, regulation, X, Y,
Right.
Z. So if you were redesigning the physician leadership development tomorrow, what would you change?
I would weave into it coaching much earlier, as far as having not just a mentor, but a true coach who can help you through the development process. I also have to be honest, I really think that we underestimate the power of psychotherapy and analysis. And I think that for many of us, when we get confronted with stress and strain in the workplace, we end up dredging up emotions and unresolved issues from our personal life that we need to work through. And so I really, really encourage that everyone spend some time normalizing and participating in psychoanalysis, and really taking care of themselves. The work we do is very, very stressful. And I appreciate that you may play pickleball and that's your form of stress relief. But the most important thing is that we tend to our relationships with our partners and our children and our parents. Once we make peace with those, we become invincible.
Um, so now I just want to gear up to another subject, and I want to bring into your new role in Sentact, because it sits at a fascinating intersection. Again, in my book, I argue that technology earns its place in healthcare only when it amplifies the human judgment rather than replacing it. So, safety technology, when it works well, makes the right things easier to do, and when the wrong thing harder to hide, actually. In between, all these things should get balanced. You have now joined a company through the Performance Health Partners and Vizient PSO acquisition. So has aggregated one of the largest patient safety data sets in the country. Let's talk about it. What does that combined data set let healthcare leaders see that they couldn't see before?
That's such a great question, because the combined data set is very valuable. We can help highlight what some of the big trends are that we're seeing, which people report on. So we know that falls continues to be a real problem in hospitals that is difficult to maintain, falls with harm particularly. We know that hospital-acquired infections continue to be a significant issue. Although I will say, I'm very, you quoted in the beginning that, the progress we've made around safety. In the last, 10 years, we've seen hospital-acquired infections drop by 25%. So there is good that's happening in there in the safety realm too, which I'm very proud of. Transitions of care continue to be an important element. And then the area that tends to jump to the top is medication administration, right? Medication administration tends to be one of our greatest opportunities. Now, that is, if you look at the collective of having a lot of resources, or sort of a large database of hospitals, that's what we're seeing as trends. But I want to just throw two caveats on there. We live in a self-reporting environment. So we are only as good as we are self-reporting. So those trends tend to be a little bit biased to how your systems are set up to self-report. So if you have a very robust medication harm reporting system, you're going to hear about more medication events, right? That's just how it works. So to be honest, while I will look at all the trends, the thing that I think becomes the most important about reporting is the human element and how we have empowered and engaged our teams to report. And then from a Sentact standpoint, how do we then bring those disparate hospitals together to collaborate? So actually, as much as I'm focused on the ability to get good data and look at good data, what we're far more interested in is how do I take a hospital that's in New York City and a hospital that's in Los Angeles and put them on a Zoom together and say, hey, listen, hospital in Los Angeles, you have really done an incredible job of reducing falls. You should talk to this similar hospital in New York City. And I can start to air traffic control those conversations. And that's what our team does. We just had a meeting 2 weeks ago where we brought together 50 healthcare leaders who are part of our PSO in Chicago, and they presented. And they talked about what they're doing around AI to improve healthcare. They talked a lot about huddles and the use of huddles, which I'm a big proponent of, in hospitals. And they shared what they were doing as best practice. And then everyone would listen. And then afterwards, everyone would go get a cup of coffee, or at the end of the day, we'd all go get a drink. And then they would talk to each other. So that's where I really think the power of having multiple hospitals and systems in our PSO really becomes. The data is important. It's the collaboration and the human element that's invaluable.
100% agreed. Now I look after 3 different units, and I try to bring the people like that. We just want to share the lessons, and then we just want to bring the same knowledge base to all organization. But here, just one question I want to ask. I mean, I always work with my CMOs, even though I'm a physician, but then I want to encourage them. I want to influence them at the same time with this quality culture. What is the one question you think every CMO should be able to answer about their data set and most cannot?
How often do you look at it, review it, and question it? So how often are you sitting down and looking at your data and then questioning it? And that, to me, is the single most important thing that we need to do. Now, there are so many data tools out there, right? There's so many different dashboards that you could go to. Many chief medical officers will very quickly feel overwhelmed and then underutilize the data that's there. And so where I really empower my team is say, you have a quality director, have them be fluent and functional in pulling the data. Your job is to always be questioning it and pushing back. I'll give you an example that I've utilized, which I found to be really effective. Again, we come back to this. We live in a society, for the most part, where harm is self-reported. So one of the things that I did when I was over our California region was I brought all of our hospitals together. And I said, you all need to be reviewing your serious safety events every month. And then we're all 29 hospitals are going to get together once a month. And I need a report out as to when did you meet last and what does your data show? How many events did you review and how did you score them? And it was really interesting because when we started the meeting, what I was noticing was that many of the hospitals would be doing their serious safety event reviews like the week before our meeting. And what I was learning was they were never doing it prior to that. They were doing it because they knew Dr. Testa was going to ask about it, right? So then if they became accountable to doing it, and then when they reported and they said, well, we had nothing to review, there was nothing to review, I would always challenge them. And I would always ask them, okay, you have nothing to review? I don't believe you. Like find me some events to review. You're getting together, find some events to review. You should have a questioning attitude. You should be curious about harm. And then when events came up that were difficult, we all supported that hospital. And so if you had that retained foreign body or the wrong side of procedure, then it wasn't about, oh, shame on you. It was about like, oh, so by the grace of God go I. I could see how that could happen. Hey, we implemented this up in Northern California. Maybe you could bring this to Southern California. Or, oh, we really understand that. Like it just became a much healthier culture, but it wasn't always pleasant. And there wasn't expected accountability that you were reviewing it and doing it. So it required some ownership, but it was, it comes back to that concept of like just constantly be questioning the data and constantly asking questions.
100% agreed. I mean, I love reading the RCA reports, and I agree with you. Sometimes team, and I agree. I mean, I don't want to blame anyone. They're overwhelmed. So many RCAs and then different kind of studies they have to work on. But I believe each of such events are an opportunity to investigate further, and each one has different lessons. If you pick them, you can sort so many things in your organization. And that's always I want to tell to my teams, guys, enjoy, creating your RCA. Don't think that this is something, an extra load, extra job. And I just want them to create this fun part of that. It is. It's not easy. And it's, I think, the culture.
But it comes back to being able to find the joy in the activity.
That's true. Very true.
And joy is something that is shared typically. So you have to find the joy in your work too. And I try to radiate that to the team. When we have that, like, you know, I mean, trust me, it's annoying when I'm asking a million questions about being like, I challenge you on this, or I don't believe that. But then when we get to the point of where I'm like, good job, I think you got this. It just is so fun. It feels so good. If someone just throws data up in front of me and it looks good, that's not the same. If someone puts good data up there and I go, well, have you thought about this? Well, we did think about that. Well, have you tried this? We did try that. And I push through those questions. And then 20 minutes later, it's still holding up. That's fun to me. And I think that joy tends to radiate back and forth, and that discourse and accomplishment is meaningful.
Very true. And patients will get the great outcome in case we manage it in this way. So now I just want to jump to your common spread days. And I can tell you that most of listeners run multi-site systems, and some run single facilities. But scale is increasingly the reality of our industry all over the world. And then where we have group operators running tens of hospitals across multiple countries. You have operated at the scale of 140 hospitals. That's a very rare experience.
I was actually over 29. Common Spirit was 140. I was responsible for 29 in California.
Okay. Even though, this is a huge scale. 29 hospital is not something easy to manage. And here, for especially the healthcare leaders listening us, I want to ask a couple questions around this experience. The driving the culture change across this much of hospitals is not something easy. What did you learn about leading change at the scale of the management the textbooks don't tell you?
Yeah, so there's three things that I think are critical, and it took me a minute to understand this, but I tell every single new chief medical officer, chief nursing officer the same thing. And I alluded to it earlier in our conversation. There's three key elements that I want them to focus on when they're looking to get outcomes and change culture. First is you can't be everything to everyone all the time. You need to pick what you are going to focus on. And then there's other things that are going to have to wait a moment. And you need to be constantly that clinical administrator who's going to be triaging those problems. And it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable because sepsis mortality may need to wait a few more months while you're working on CD diff because that's what the team can tolerate right now. And you're going to need to own that. And others may feel uncomfortable with that. But you can't be everything to everyone all the time. But you need to be something to somebody today. So pick what you're going to focus on and focus on it. The second thing is there needs to be a culture of collaboration. The novice CMO, CNO, and clinical leader tends to walk in and try to fix everything themselves. I am still guilty of this coming into a new company. We need to identify our resources and empower our resources, and then we need to collaborate across specialties. And so that collaborative approach, it just makes it more enjoyable, but it also makes it vastly more effective. So figuring out how you are going to effectively collaborate is really, really important. The third is, and I mentioned this before, is this concept of tenacity. And I will say, I think tenacity tends to be misunderstood. Persistence is doing the same thing over and over again. Tenacity is trying the same problem over and over again, but each time adjusting and adjusting and adjusting. And I'm a firm believer that you need both persistence and tenacity to win out, because this stuff is hard. And some days you will not have the energy to show up to try something different to fix the problem. So it's okay. Let's try the same thing over and over again for a while. But then when you have that creative moment, change your approach, go through that PDSA cycle. But that tenacity and persistence is really important. So those are the three key elements that for every leader, if you're going to look to culture change, I really lean into.
I really enjoy this kind of easy setup. And I 100% agree with you. If I look at my incident reports, not just in my current hospitals, even the ones before I was running a large academic medical center, and at the end, the highest category of the incidents, they're always coming from this collaboration, communication, and then we need to sort this because the larger hospitals we have, the bigger teams we have at the end of the day, there are some silos and then they're not communicating to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And this creates so many different issues for the hospital operations. But one other question, if I may ask here, I mean, your hospitals were in the same country at least. What about, I mean, what would you recommend to these operators if in case they have operations in different countries? Today, Cleveland has one hospital in Ohio, one in London, one in Abu Dhabi. So what would you recommend to the head of safety to manage these different geographies?
It's a great question. So what I learned very early on, and I think this came from having the opportunity to have been a chief medical officer and then having the opportunity to create the job description for multiple chief medical officers at multiple hospitals, and then having rolled it out across 29 hospitals, was that too often the clinical leader becomes focused on the issue du jour. The physician who's not showing up in the emergency department to manage the impacted food bolus because they don't consider it an emergency at 2:00 in the morning. The physician who's now in the ICU who's yelling at a nurse. You could spend your whole day as a chief medical officer or any clinical leader chasing down problems and feeling like you've done a lot at the end of the day, because you have, but you haven't actually moved the needle forward in making your hospital safer or higher quality. So what I've told and challenged every one of my chief medical officers, and I would say this carries over to every leader in the hospital, is that there needs to be a hierarchy as to how we are going to improve healthcare. And you need to focus on project management around 4 key concepts. First, and foundationally, you need to focus on safety. So what are the projects that are in your control that you are working on safety every single day? The next thing is quality. And I think there's a misunderstanding between safety and quality. I think many people think that they're the same thing. Safety is all of those things that we never want to happen. We never want you to have a retained foreign body. We never want you to have a fall in our hospital. And then we also need to have the projects that we're focusing on that are quality related. Quality are all the things we want to happen all the time. We want you to get to the cath lab within 90 minutes if you have a STEMI, right? We want you to get on antibiotics early in the emergency department if you have pneumonia, right? Those are 2 separate. Safety should never happen. Quality should always happen. And then the third element to it is patient experience. So we want our patients and their families to have a respectful experience. The fourth element to all of this is utilization. So how do we do 1, 2, and 3, but be sensitive to the fact that we have a limited number of resources? So every time I meet with a chief nursing officer, chief medical officer, we talk about what they're doing at their hospital on a regular basis. And I don't care if you're in California or if you're in London or if somewhere else in the world, it's the same thing, right? What are we doing around safety? What are the projects that you have in the works? What are you doing around quality? What are the projects you have in the works? What are your priorities? What are you doing around patient experience? And what are you doing around utilization? Then you can tell me about the physician who's not coming in at 2:00 in the morning to manage the impacted food bullets, right? And all the other stuff. That's important too. But I first want us to prioritize safety, quality, experience, and utilization.
It's all about the culture, and we need to
Yeah,
set the
100%.
culture in the right way.
100%.
So, Dr. Nick, we're approaching to the end, and I always like to close these conversations by returning to the human core of the work. And I ask the question, will there be hospitals in future? And the honest answer, what I hear always, is that the form may change, the technology will certainly change, but the human relationships at the center of healthcare will not. Every meaningful transformation we make ultimately rests on the trust between the people inside the organization. So here, I just want to ask you last final two questions. Um, what do you wish more boards and senior leaders understood about the preventable harm? And that's what we just touched to the point before we start about the board, about the non-healthcare leaders. How can we explain this better? And what do you wish the method should be?
So there's two answers to that. The first thing is I really wish there was a deeper understanding of self-reporting, and that if we move towards a culture of psychological safety, what we'll see in self-reporting is harm events will go up because we're creating a culture of transparency. That's a little bit uncomfortable, and we need everybody to accept that we actually want to see those events be reported. That is what I would sort of psychologically wish on the group. The action that I would like to see everybody taking is, and I know this sounds overly simplified, and it is a challenge, particularly the higher up you get, is I'd like to see everybody rounding on a regular basis. I am telling you, if we as leaders can get out and round on a regular basis, it is one of the most impactful things. I'll tell you like a very, very brief story if it's okay. But, I always would go round at the hospitals when I would make site visits. And of course, everybody was like trying to like make the unit look nice. Dr. Testa's coming. We got to like do the right thing. And at the same time, we were also working on moving our interventional cardiologist to radial access. And so that's where you don't go in through the femoral artery, you go through the radial artery. And so for some of our older cardiologists, it's become more challenging. And I've sat at a million meetings and been like, no, you got to do this. And they tell me why it's more difficult and we can't do it. I wasn't trained that way when the outcomes are proven to be better. I was rounding at one of our hospitals. I met a lovely 52-year-old gentleman who had had his third STEMI. And this was the first time he had actually had a radial access. And I was asking him about his experience. And he goes, oh my God. He's like, I've had 2 other cardiac caths. They were terrible. I had to sit there. All he could remember was the pressure stop that they put over the femoral artery afterwards because it was very uncomfortable. He was like, this one was so easy. They went on my wrist. It was so comfortable. He was like, I'm going to be out of here today. This was amazing. And so his story not only gave me fodder to tell that story over and over again when I was trying to encourage our cardiologists, but it also gave me a drive because I will never forget him. And I will never forget him telling me the story about moving from femoral artery access to radial access. So if there's one ask I have, it is that our boards, our chiefs of staff, our CMOs, our CNOs, our CEOs get out there and round on a regular basis and just talk to patients and then talk to staff.
100%. And not just the rounding in the daytime, rounding in the nighttime as well.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
I love my night roundings because when I round at night and you can meet with all those night shift teams, they always feel that they have been forgotten. No one listens to them. And when you meet them and when you have breakfast at 3 a.m. together with these people, you can really hear the real stories of what's happening in the hospital.
And that's what makes the culture of a hospital and any healthcare system fun, right? Is if you work in a hospital, you generally enjoy that milieu, that unique culture that makes up a hospital that never sleeps and is always ready.
And here, Dr. Nick, there are so many people actually listening us from the daily work and they're always busy. So here, if I may ask you, what is the single behavior change you would ask every CMO and healthcare leaders listening to make this week?
I would come back to, well, I already said rounding. So that for me is the biggest one. If you're not rounding, you need to go out and round. And I'll just do, however you may choose to do it. be it on staff, be it on patients, be in the environment. Sentact has a resource to help you do it. That's part of the reason I came to Sentact, is we have an incredible rounding platform. The other area that I really encourage all leaders to participate in is your safety huddle. And I'm not sure how pervasive it's become across the world, but in the United States, the concept of having a morning safety huddle where the whole team gets together, not via Zoom or Teams or whatever digital platform, for physically gets together, and you all look at each other. And for 30 minutes, you talk about the operational aspects of the hospital, and you develop strong situational awareness as to what's going on, what happened in the last 24 hours, what's happening in the next 24 hours. Now, many places are doing safety huddles. I would ask the CEO, the CMO, the CNO all participate on a regular basis. The executive presence around safety is what makes culture change happen. And demonstratable areas that you can do that every day are at the safety huddle.
100%. I think it has been now 15 years. I have my morning huddles, safety huddles or morning huddles, you can name it. Another important thing what I have noticed with these huddles, it is about the team collaboration. We have so many silos, and in many hospitals, when I go and visit the hospitals, I ask to the CNO, when was the last time he or she met with the CFO? Or I ask to the CFO, when was the last time you met with the head of biomed? What I do, I try to bring everyone around the table, and then I want everyone to share the updates. So let the CMO hear the supply chain updates. Let the CNO hear the facility management updates. Let the CFO hear the CMO updates. Then I don't need to be the messenger in between these teams, and everyone starts hearing all these details. So
100%.
this definitely brings the gel within the team. And if someone is absent, at least we can know, I mean, he has his child sick today, and then she is in leave or something. It supports a lot of things within the organization, not just the safety around the organization. It brings so many teamwork elements, and I love having this kind of huddles. And that was a wonderful point.
I would take that one step further, which is not only do you learn about what's happening across the institution, and the CFO is hearing from the CNO, and the director of the OR is hearing from supply chain, but you can in real time start fixing things, because you can identify that patient up on 3 East who is totally unhappy. It actually is because they're getting a cold tray every single day. And you can have food and nutrition go up there, do some service recovery, understand why they're not getting like warm food, and fix that in real time. That's really powerful. The other thing that I found is really powerful about the safety huddle is you can also direct the consciousness of the institution towards problems you want to fix. Remember what I said, you can't be everything to everyone all the time. But let's say I had a hospital that was having a C. diff outbreak, and we had a problem with Clostridium difficile. So every morning at that huddle, we would talk about our C. diff numbers. Did we have any new patients who were in isolation? Did we have anyone who tested positive? Is there any reason we didn't follow our protocols? And all of a sudden, what started to happen is it stopped becoming Nick Testa's problem, and it started becoming a problem that everybody understood. So even the CFO knew what was going on with the loose stools up on 3 West, right? I mean, it was like, and that's the culture that you need if you're really going to fix a problem at a hospital, is that you need everybody pulling the oars together to identify like, oh yeah, every morning at safety huddle, we talk about C. diff. This is a problem. I know I'm going to need to report out on it. So it just really is a great venue to start.
Exactly.
I don't want to say manipulating the culture, but directing the culture towards the areas that you're prioritizing.
Setting the culture. Dr. Nick, that's a powerful place to end. And thank you so much joining me today. It was an amazing episode. Just one last point. Where can listeners learn more about your work at Sentact and about the patient safety teaching you do at your university?
Yeah, so everything's available on our webpage at sentact.com. We have quite a deep bench of learning and education that's available. In addition, we have a really nice display of all of our resources. We have at Sentact grown into a company that provides not just technology, but analytic solutions as well as staffing solutions. Because as you pointed out, you can't just do technology in healthcare. You need to do technology, but you need to pair it with good analytics and then also the ability to help with staffing, which we also do. And we have grown out to be a sort of a one-stop shop to provide services in those lanes that I discussed. We provide services around safety, quality, and experience. So I welcome anyone to go to Sentact.com, and there's much more information and education there.
Brilliant. And also they can follow you on LinkedIn.
Yes, definitely.
Dr. Nicholas Testa, thank you for joining us again on the Chief Healthcare Officer podcast. This has been one of the most important conversations we have had this season. To our listeners, if this episode resonated, please share it with one colleague who needs to hear it. And patient safety is not just a topic that improves through quiet agreement. It improves through louder conversations in the right rooms. Until next time, I'm Dr. Fatih Mehmet Gül. Thanks for listening us.